Welcome to part 9 of my 10-day bike trip series exploring the shores of Lake Huron and Lake Simcoe in Ontario, Canada. In this segment of the journey, I'll be riding from Conestogo Lake Conservation Area to Guelph Lake Conservation Area and also exploring the city of Guelph. Today is Saturday, July 28th, 2018, and I woke up at my campsite at Conestogo Lake at around 8 a.m. It rained a fair bit last night, so I took my time getting packed up to let my tent dry as much as possible. By 9:30 I was on the road and ready to go, but unfortunately just as I was pulling away I felt some large raindrops coming down. I found a picnic shelter where I can stay dry while I do some research because I really hadn't been expecting rain today. I went onto the Environment Canada website and looked at the weather radar for Exeter, Ontario. I'm able to conveniently spot Conestogo Lake on the map here. The shaded blue areas indicate where it's raining, and the website lets you look at 10-minute snapshots. As you can see, there's a small cluster of rain heading west, and in the last snapshot that was just taken, some of that rain is directly over top of Conestogo Lake. Since this just appears to be an isolated shower with no more rain coming behind it, I might as well just wait another 10 minutes rather than starting off my morning by getting soaked. Conestogo Lake is right in the heart of Mennonite country, and while I was waiting I spotted 4 Mennonite men sitting on a wagon being pulled by 2 horses. It looks like they're visiting the lake for a day of fishing. Notice that this wagon has car tires and the seats look like they came from a minivan. Also notice that the man in the front seat is using a smartphone. As I explained in my previous video, different Mennonite groups follow different rules with respect to modern technology. As I had predicted, within about 10 minutes the rain had fully cleared and I made my way out of the park. I made a left turn onto Wellington County Road 11 and headed northeast. Just down the road I spotted a horse and buggy. This one looks a lot more traditional. Here I'm crossing over the dam which forms Conestogo Lake. Over on the left I can see the beach where I swam yesterday. On the right I can see where the Conestogo River continues flowing on the other side of the dam, which eventually flows into the Grand River. This dam was built in 1958. I made a right turn when I got to the 4th line and headed southeast. Although the rain is completely stopped, there's still a lot of dark clouds overhead. The time is around 10:30 now and the temperature is about 17 degrees Celsius. This building on the left is a poultry farm. I imagine these horses are used for pulling buggies. As I was riding by, these cows all looked up and stared back at me. Maybe this is the first time they've ever seen a recumbent bike. Very similar to the one I saw yesterday, I believe this is a Mennonite Church. Notice the large area next to it where parishioners can tie up their horses, essentially the Mennonite equivalent of a parking lot. There's quite a wide variety in the different types of agriculture along this road. I could be mistaken, but I believe this old building is a Mennonite school. With the colder temperatures this morning, I'm definitely glad I was able to dodge the rain and not have to be riding in wet clothing right now. Up ahead, line 4 curves around to the south and then curves around again to the west, becoming Ruggles Rd. I've now entered Woolwich Township, which is within Waterloo Region, so I'm temporarily leaving Wellington County, but I'll be entering it again later in the day. I'm now riding through the community of Floradale. On the corner of Ruggles Rd and Floradale Road, there's a restaurant called Bonnie Lou's Cafe, which would be a perfect spot to stop for breakfast. This building served as the community's general store since the late 1800s, and many aspects of it have been preserved. I ordered the Hungry Man breakfast and also bought a date cookie which looked interesting. Most of the staff members and other patrons were in Mennonite plain dress. I thoroughly enjoyed my experience at Bonnie Lou's. Floradale also has an independent gas station as well as a business which sells blacksmith supplies. This community was built on the Canagagagoo Creek just upstream from the Woolwich Reservoir, which is a place I visited 9 years ago during my university years. I briefly headed north along Floradale Road and then turned right onto Forapine Rd heading east. This building is the Floradale Mennonite Church, which looks quite a bit different than the other Mennonite church I saw this morning. The time is now around 11:45 and the roads have mostly dried off. There are still lots of clouds in the sky and the temperature is still only about 18 degrees Celsius. I made a left turn onto Arthur Street and headed north. Here's another Mennonite horse and buggy. This one has a roof on it. As you can see, Arthur Street is a pretty busy road, so I was glad when I got to turn left onto Sandy Hills Drive. I'm now once again heading in the west direction. Sandy Hills Drive seems like an appropriate name for this road, as there are many rolling hills, almost like sand dunes. At the bottom of the last hill I made a left turn onto Northfield Drive. I'm now re-entering Wellington County and entering the Township of Centre Wellington. Here I'm crossing over the Carroll Creek. When I reached the 8th line I made a right turn and headed southeast. The pavement on this road is in pretty rough shape, but the scenery is beautiful. There's another crossing of the Carrol Creek here, and while I was on the bridge I spotted a mother deer and her fawn stop for a drink. Much like the deer that I spotted back on day 7 of the trip, this one's very aware that she's being watched by me. I can feel the wind seems to have picked up and the clouds are looking really dark and grey. I'm really hoping it's not going to start raining again. Up ahead I'll be crossing the Grand River, which is where all of the water bodies in this area eventually flow into. This river is quite large and flows all the way down to Lake Erie. On the bike trip I did back in May, I crossed the river on both day 3 and day 9 of that trip. The Grand River is a popular spot for canoeing and other water activities, and this is one of the public access points. Distracted by the beautiful agricultural scenery, I forgot to make my left turn onto Sideroad 10, so I instead took Sideroad 12, which is gravel. Soon I reached the 6th line where I could turn left and backtrack to rejoin my planned route. I made a right turn when I reached Sideroad 10 and continued northeast. When I was planning this segment of the trip, I remembered that almost all of the secondary roads in this area are gravel, so it's safer to stick with the route that I planned ahead of time. Built in 1876, this is the Bethany United Church. As I've been riding along here, I've been noticing signs for something called the Cottontail Road Trail. I made a right turn onto the 2nd line and headed southeast. The time is now around 1:15, and since I had such a late breakfast, I won't be stopping for lunch today. I made a left turn when I reached Side Road 14. In my route today, I've bypassed the historic communities of Elora and Fergus, which are both situated on the Grand River. They're both beautiful small towns, and I'd recommend visiting them if you're in this area. I made a right turn and briefly rode along Wellington Road 7 before turning left onto the 8th line heading northeast. This road is the boundary between the Township of Centre Wellington and Guelph Township, where I'll be crossing into next. The distance for my route today is significantly less than what I did yesterday. One of the reasons for this is that I planned my 10-day trip such that day 9 and day 10 could be accomplished in a single day if there had been some kind of delay earlier in the trip. But since nothing like that happened, I instead get to enjoy 2 shorter days of riding to finish off my trip. I made a right turn onto Jones Baseline and headed southeast. Admittedly, I probably could have planned a slightly more direct cycling route to get to Guelph Lake, but my original plan for today had actually been to camp at Rockwood Conservation Area, which is further to the east. Unfortunately, Rockwood Conservation Area doesn't have any available campsites for tonight, so I'm using Guelph Lake as a backup. The reason I didn't make reservations ahead of time is because the Grand River Conservation Authority's policy is that you're required to book a minimum of 2 nights for weekend reservations during July and August. Unfortunately, that policy is not very convenient for bike touring. So rather than continuing southeast on Jones Baseline, I made a right turn onto Mill Road and headed down a big hill. I didn't have lunch today, so I'll just be having some snacks until dinner time. The time is now 2:30 p.m. and I've traveled 58 kilometers so far today. Despite having had a relatively late start in the day, this will be the earliest I'll arrive at my campground on this trip. I double checked and the camping check-in time at Guelph Lake is 2 p.m, so thankfully I'm not too early. I proceeded to the gatehouse and purchased a camping permit for the night. The land on which this conservation area sits was once farmland that was expropriated to make way for the Guelph Lake Reservoir. Many of these park roads were once country roads with farms on either side. It looks like these people are having a big family picnic. I selected a campsite within the area known as Lakeview, which is a radio-free zone. As the name suggests, down the hill you can see Guelph Lake. So this will be my final campsite for this 10-day trip. As soon as I arrived, I took out my wet tent and let it dry out a bit before setting it up. At around 5:30 I got back on my bike and went to explore around Guelph Lake before heading into the city for dinner. Similar to Conestogo Lake where I started this morning, Guelph Lake is a man-made reservoir which was created when a dam was built on the Speed River in 1976. I'm now riding through an area known as Guelph Lake Island, which among other things hosts an annual music festival called Hillside. I'm sure this lake looks a lot nicer under a blue sunny sky. I got back onto the main park roads and made my way towards the exit of the park. I headed southwest along Conservation Drive towards the city of Guelph. I decided to go and check out the dam which forms Guelph Lake. Now that the sun's decided to come out, the lake's looking much more scenic. So prior to 1976, this whole area occupied by the lake was just a small river valley surrounded by farmland. The Speed River flows right through the heart of the city of Guelph, and it was known for causing flooding during the wet months, but also almost completely drying up sometimes in the summer. With this dam in place, a constant flow of the Speed River can be maintained throughout the year. The dam was retrofitted for hydroelectric power generation in 1982. From Conservation Road, I made a left turn onto Victoria Road North. Just after entering the city limits of Guelph, I noticed this sign for the Royal Recreation Trail and decided to follow it. Since my original plan for tonight had been to camp at Rockwood, I don't have a pre-planned cycling route to get to Guelph. Normally in this situation I would rely on my smartphone to recommend a cycling route, but my borrowed iPhone 4 sadly wasn't up for the task. Nevertheless, it seems like I made a pretty good decision choosing this trail, which follows along the path of the Speed River. When I reach Woodlawn Road, the trail continues over on the other side, so I followed it. After a long day of dark clouds, it's really turning into a nice evening. Where I'm riding now is known as Riverside Park. This trail eventually ends at Speedville Avenue, where I turned right and crossed over the Speed River. Shortly afterwards, I turned left and followed Woolwich Street towards Guelph's downtown. One of Guelph's water towers is currently being repainted on the inside and out, a task which needs to be done every 25 years. Guelph was first settled in 1827 at the convergence of the Speed and Eramosa rivers. Eventually, Woolwich Street branches off to the left, but I continued along Norfolk Street. The city has a current population of 132,000, making it the largest place I'll be visiting on this trip. I made a left turn onto Quebec Street. Although I passed through the city of Guelph a few times over the years, this is my first time actually visiting the downtown. So far, I'm really impressed by all the beautiful historic buildings. I headed southeast on Wyndham Street and then southwest on McDonald Street. This is the Basilica of Our Lady Immaculate, which was completed in 1888. I turned around and headed in the opposite direction along McDonald Street in search of a place to have dinner. This is one of the bus stops for Guelph Central Station. This bridge carries the CN rail line across the Speed River into Guelph. Crossing below it are another set of tracks which are for the Guelph Junction Railway. For dinner I selected a Thai restaurant on McDonald Street called My Thai. The time is around 7 p.m. so I definitely have an appetite for dinner now. I ordered the Panang curry, which is one of my favorites, and it was really delicious. Definitely an upgrade over the dinner I had last night. After my meal I headed northwest along Wyndham Street. After crossing Woolwich Street, this street curves north and becomes Eramosa Street. Here I'm crossing over the Speed River again. I had a bit of a hill to climb and decided to take the sidewalk since there's no bike lane and these cars are moving really fast. I've chosen a route to get back to my campsite which should be faster than the one that I took to get to downtown. I made a quick stop at the Zare supermarket to stock up on a few things for my one remaining day of riding tomorrow. When I reached Victoria Road, I made a left turn and headed northwest. The time is now 8:45 and I can see the sun is starting to get low in the sky. The setting sun is casting an orange glow on everything that it's illuminating. It's hard to believe it's still the same day as when it was dark and cloudy for so long. After crossing the Speed River again, I've now left the city limits of Guelph and re-entered the township of Guelph Eramosa. I made a right turn onto Conservation Road and headed northeast. From this lookout spot along the road, Guelph Lake looks very calm and still. When I arrived back at the conservation area, I proceeded straight to the restroom building to have a shower and get ready for bed. I typically try to select campsites which are as close as possible to the restroom building, but I wasn't as lucky this time. Much like every other campground I've stayed at which is operated by the Grand River Conservation Authority, this one has a coin-operated shower. Back at my campsite, the sun had completely set, and all that was left was a slight blue haze in the sky. So including my exploration of the city of Guelph this evening, I traveled a total of 95 kilometers today. Stay tuned for the final installment in this video series where tomorrow I'll ride southeast down to Burlington and catch a train back to my home city of Toronto. I hope you enjoyed joining me on this leg of the journey. Please leave a comment below and let me know what you thought, and thanks for watching.